the amount of money that is needed to sustain a mortgage that high in 16 was $32 an hour of income coming in, and more than doubled for to afford a house in 21. But sadly, the actual dollars, household income for July of 16 is $34 an hour of average, and now it's $38. So everything else has gone up more than twice except income. So welcome. We're really going to be anxious to hear what you have to say.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. It's yeah, for those who joined late and wonder why I look, this is how I normally look when I'm not sitting in the parking lot of a No Frills in Brighton, Ontario. So we're camping this weekend with friends, and I enjoy. Thank you. I had made this commitment, so I don't mind coming. Getting away from that for a little bit to share with you. I have a bit of a PowerPoint that I'm going to share, and it'll essentially try to tell you a little bit about the background of Menno Homes, give you an update on the recent project that we did, and then I really want to open it up for a Q&A afterwards, because me just kind of spieling off, what we've done and everything else. I mean, it might be interesting, but I'm more open to trying to just answer questions that you might have. Our hope is that somehow we can encourage or incentivize you to, replicate what we've done and do it in a way that makes sense for Huron County. I live, so Menno Homes is situated in Waterloo County, or region of Waterloo. I live outside of that area. I'm in Wellington County, but I'm a Bruce County farm boy by nature. So quite familiar with the landscape between where I live and the west coast of Ontario. So with that, I think what I'm going to do is I will switch it over to my PowerPoint. I did test it earlier, so although I'm tethered off my phone to try and get 4 bars of service here, I think everything works fine. But if I have any trouble, I'm sure somebody will let me know. So we're going to share screen now. And slideshow from the beginning. Okay, so you're able to see that okay, Pat? So Menno Homes, we are an affordable housing provider in Waterloo region, and we've been in existence for 20 years now. And I like this quote from Carl Zaire. This was the cover of the brochure of our capital campaign material for the most recent project that we had. And he goes, "We as a society have a responsibility to make sure that appropriate housing is available to everyone." And it's interesting when people talk about affordable housing, it kind of means something different for everyone too. Menno Homes focuses on rental housing, and it's not the homeless housing situation. We're working more so with people who are able to live independently, but just struggling to find something that works for them. Some people, you talk about affordable housing and it means, how do I get into the home ownership market? My son works in Waterloo, and last year they bought a house in Listowel because that's what they had to do in order to find a housing that was affordable for them as well. But from Menno Homes' perspective, we focus specifically on the rental market. So this is a bit of a snapshot of the housing that we have throughout Waterloo region. So we are in every municipality other than Cambridge and North Dumfries. We have a range of housing that's available. So we have apartments, we have semis, some duplexes. Most of it is housing that we've built, although last year, if you look in the bottom left-hand corner there's an apartment building there. And this is something I want to come back to later when we maybe chat about opportunities for you in Huron. There was a federal program that went through about 38, 40 years ago, where there were all sorts of small nonprofits that got started, kind of grassroots initiatives. Often it was a local church or a collection of churches that came together, or a business association, chamber of commerce, something like that. And there was a real influx of cash from the government at that point to build all sorts of affordable housing. And there's all sorts of these small independent nonprofits kind of sprinkled across the province. And quite a number of them are getting tired in terms of the board members. Their board recruitment might have been coming from the church that originally started them. And, you know, churches are struggling to find people to show up, much less to fill board positions. And so the reality is there's a number of these out there that are looking for somebody to kind of help them along and carry on the good work that they've done. And the one in the bottom left-hand corner is an example of one that last year was donated to Menno Homes as a project. Their mortgage is free and clear, and we now have the responsibility for it. The board can move on to retirement, full retirement, I guess. And because it's now part of our portfolio, it does give us some scale now to take on new projects. And I'll talk a little bit about that later as well. So we have a mix of housing, apartments, family units for seniors, for singles, for young families, right across the spectrum. You might have seen this graphic before. It's the housing continuum. This is something that CMHC, Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, uses to kind of illustrate the range of housing, something like what I talked to earlier. And Menno Homes, we fit squarely in that affordable rental housing sector. And if you're familiar with the Kitchener-Waterloo area, and this is a graphic I use, you know, to kind of help people see how do we fit within the you know, the community of other nonprofits who are doing similar work, but maybe slightly different. So off to the left, you have folks like the House of Friendship, like the Y, the Working Center, Supportive Housing of Waterloo, folks that work with people who have, you know, often mental health issues, addiction issues, and really need probably 24/7 hour support to help them be more successful in life. Further to the right of Menno Homes, that's where you have Habitat for Humanity and organizations that are trying to help people move into home ownership. And we're kind of in the middle of those groups. So the thing that kind of makes us distinct that way would be that although our tenants wouldn't actually require supports, we do have a community support worker who does help out with some of the softer supports for people. So that's what this slide refers to. So, you know, it's a role where our tenants can live independently, but we're really trying to create a sense of community for people, much more so in the units where we have a number of houses together or in the apartment buildings. They need help navigating. And if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, that picture there are community support workers. At the back of the picture, the family on the right-hand side is a family that had just come from Syria. This picture is a couple years old, so a Syrian refugee family. And the woman who's leaning on the couch there, her name is Hadil. She was actually one of our original tenants at a project on Village Road in Kitchener almost 20 years ago. Originally from Iraq, she was still a tenant there when this picture was taken. You know, she's been able to move on in life. She raised her children there as a single parent, and you know, has a job. She's the manager of a U-Haul rental place, and she's done okay. She's been able to move out now, but we were able to call on her to come back and help with some translation issues when this first family landed. And that's the sort of support that wouldn't have been possible if we hadn't had that community support worker in place. So it's some of those things that we try to use the community support worker to either help people navigate the system or just to provide some social supports and create a sense of community like you see there in the top left-hand corner. So in Waterloo region, the current waiting list for housing is just over 6,000 people or 6,000 households. And that's in a community or a region of, you know, roughly 500,000 people. When Menno Homes got started in 2001, the waiting list at that time was around 3,000 people or 3,000 households, sorry. And it was about 3,000 households still in around 2017. And it had stayed static for quite a number of years, but we've seen a real escalation such that it's now doubled in that period of time. And what's the common denominator with what you're experiencing in Huron County? Well, it's the price of real estate, the price of housing. And so what's happening is that normal transition of people, you know, starting out first living in rental housing and then maybe being able to move off into home ownership, that's not happening anymore. And so it's putting a lot of back pressure on the rental housing market. We're experiencing that in Waterloo, and I'm sure you're seeing that in Huron County as well. So although we're not directly related to the real estate market in terms of resale housing, we do feel the impact of that, as it really makes it hard for people to move out of rental housing into home ownership if that would have been the normal path for them. So a bit of a snapshot here of what it looks like in Waterloo region. The average rent for a 1-bedroom, this is CMHC average market rent, is $1,073. That's a year ago. We know that if you actually went to the open market right now and looked at the listings on Kijiji or places like that, it's going to be more like $1,200 or $1,300 a month. But the average is made up of kind of some of that old historical stock as well, 2 bedrooms or more. And the numbers in terms of increases since 2016, you can see are quite similar, roughly 23%. And how does somebody make that payment if their ODSP maximum monthly income is $1,169? That number hasn't gone up, much since 2016. So we've seen a 5.3% increase in ODSP payments from the provincial government, and yet rents, have gone up 23%. So people are falling further and further behind. And gains, if you're a senior and you're on gains, you've seen a bit more of an increase, but not much more, 13.2%. And so a senior person who's got to pay $1,613 for rent, if they're on a fixed income, those increases are really starting to impact them directly. And the inflation rates came out, I think it was yesterday or the day before. What were we now? 4.5%, something like that in Canada. I mean, they're just not keeping up, and it's really hard. And the reality is there's all sorts of other services that are in place. We talk about food banks and things like that. Well, I mean, people only really need to rely on those if they can't afford rental housing or housing that's appropriate for them. And that's just defined as no more than 30% of their gross income. And so the benchmark for that is if somebody's making, or they're not paying more than 30% of their gross income for housing, they're likely going to be able to satisfy the other needs they have in their life. But if it's above that, that's when they really start to struggle. So a little bit about mental homes, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this chart, but as an affordable housing provider, what we're trying to do is make sure that our operational model is sustainable. And this is where a lot of charities and nonprofits stumble a little bit, because they fall into a pattern of constant fundraising in order to stay afloat operationally, and that starts to take all of their energy. And when you're consumed by staying afloat operationally, you can't put your time and your money and your investment into new projects. So our model is a little bit different. It does mean we do require significantly more fundraising and donations and government support at the beginning of the project. But once a project is completed, and if we've met our fundraising goals, then the rental income from that project is sufficient to not only carry the mortgage, but the operating of the maintenance, a reserve fund, so that 20 years from now when we have to do the roof, that's taken care of. And then a portion of that also comes to pay off our property management, the social worker, and our head office. And that, so that's what pays my salary. But that means that we're not in a constant fundraising loop, because we're only ever raising money for new capital projects. So as long as our capital projects, as long as our rents are being paid and we've budgeted properly, all fundraising goes to new capital projects, which means that we avoid that trap of struggling all the time, I guess, for annual operating income. And we're not in a position where we say, oh boy, if we don't raise money this year, we're going to have to lay off the social worker, or we're not going to be able to afford to keep the accountant or something like that. So it's a key piece of how we approach affordable housing, but it does mean we end up having to do more fundraising at the beginning of a new project than you might need to otherwise. So the project that we just finished in Kitchener, it's right on the edge of Kitchener-Waterloo on the border there. If you're familiar with the area, Bridgeport and Lancaster. And it was unique in terms of 3 different partners coming together. So St. Paul's Lutheran Church had been on that site since the 50s when they built the church, and they had been in the community of Bridgeport, which was then annexed by Kitchener, since I think about 1860. A long-standing church. They had actually been part of a group of churches that were looking to amalgamate. And partway through the process, St. Paul's backed out because they said, you know what, we have a strong presence in this community. The local people use us for, the Girl Guides were meeting there. Meals on Wheels was operating out of the church. You could go there for Tai Chi classes or ballroom dancing. There was all sorts of stuff happening to the church within the church building. And they recognized that if they left the community, suddenly the community was going to have a real gap there in terms of something that maybe it wasn't necessarily church related, but was certainly community building. So they hired a consultant. The consultant decided or worked with them, and they came to the conclusion that it did make sense for them to redevelop the property, which, that's a big step for a church. To go through that process. But they then approached Mental Homes and another organization called Parents for Community Living, who works with developmentally disabled folks in Kitchener-Waterloo. So between the three partners, and without getting into too much of the detail, we created another nonprofit that acts as the developer, although in practical terms, it's Mental Homes that is leading this. And we're about a month or so away from that being declared a condominium. And so that allows the church to own their portion of the building, or their portion within the new building, which is important for the church to have ongoing ownership there. Mental Homes owns our portion. Parents for Community Living will own their portion in the building, and everyone pays condo fees. But it does make it a lot cleaner. It's just a little bit more work up front. So this is the site of Bridgeport at Lancaster before it got developed. So if you're coming into Kitchener-Waterloo, Bridgeport, which comes this way and eventually turns into Herb Street if you're going the other direction into downtown Kitchener or downtown Waterloo, and then Lancaster. It was a very attractive site from a development perspective. There are two different bus routes that go past there. It's an area that had been specifically identified by the city of Kitchener for redevelopment. And so although we did get some pushback, which isn't unusual from the neighbors, we were doing exactly what the city wanted us to be doing there and was part of the official plan for that area as well. It's about a 2.5 acre site. And so the church was demolished, and we started construction in May of 2020. So right in the midst of COVID. So that's a lot of me talking right now. I want to share a short clip of a video that we did as part of our virtual open house. I hope it works okay while I'm tethering here from my truck, but it tells a wee bit of the story about how this 3 different groups of people came together to make this project happen. So we'll just wait a second for this to load. And there we go. I'm just going to pause it there for a second. You dear, I hadn't considered that issue.
No, I couldn't hear it, Dan.
Yeah, okay, hold on just a second now. That could be a bit of a problem.
Dan, on the Zoom screen, you need to click on the button, I think, that says share or use computer video or audio.
Yeah, I'm going to go to, you're able to see that okay, though, I'm assuming, right? Or not?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so if I go, I'm going to go to the internal mic. And if you could give me a thumbs up if you can hear this once I start it again. I can see Pete Jansen. So Pete, if once I start playing, if you could give me the thumbs up. I'm not seeing a thumbs up there.
There's no audio.
Okay, well, that's unfortunate. Okay, well, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to encourage you to go to our website and watch it there. That was one thing. I am sorry, I did not test that. Oh, here we go. Let's try this. Sorry, I'm going to struggle here a little bit, but All right, can you hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. I'm gonna end up switching or not struggling through that video anymore. I'm sorry about that. If you do come to our website though, I would encourage you. Boy, it's really raining here now. So I would encourage you to watch the video there. We actually have a virtual open house, and we are in that open house. We're interviewing the tenants. We're interviewing the different partners that came together, people on our building committee, the contractor, the architect. There's a lot of good sharing. It's about half an hour long. I wasn't going to show the whole thing, don't worry. But there's a lot of good stuff there that really, I think, does a nice job of highlighting how the whole project came together.
Dan, do you want me to get it? And is this the first 4 minutes you were going to show us? Or is it a clip?
No, it's a clip
Okay.
in the middle and then a clip later on too. I was going to
Okay.
show the collaboration and then the campaign portion.
Well, I could give it a shot. I've watched it, so give me 1 second to see if I can figure it out here.
Okay. Well, why don't I carry on here for a little bit, and then if you're able to find those portions, we can maybe show them towards the end.
Come and watch this.
So yeah, so the project was this collaboration between the 3 different organizations, and what we've ended up here on that piece of land was phase 1 is the building that was just finished, and we actually have room on that property for phase 2 as well. So that's also exciting because
Tell me what this is.
land is really, really hard to get in Kitchener-Waterloo. So to have acquired that land now and have it essentially as a land bank for future development. So
Here. Look,
that's the building just before the construction fence came down then. So it's a 48-unit residential apartment building. Those are the top 4 floors. We got 41 bedroom units and 8 2-bedroom units. And then on the main floor is the residential entrance. Parents for Community Living, they have a program space there where they do day use program with the folks that they support, as well as a commercial kitchen. And the commercial kitchen is not something that the church would have been able to afford to do. But with Parents for Community Living, the folks that they work with often teaching them culinary skills is a huge deal, as well as there's some practical skills for that might actually provide employment opportunities for them, often in the back of a kitchen somewhere, a restaurant. And so that commercial kitchen then is available for the church to use on Sunday mornings or for evenings if they have events as well. The church also has space within this building. And between the church and Parents for Community Living, and this would have been more obvious in the video, so I'm apologize if I'm trying to paint a picture here now of something that you can't really see. But there is a wall there that divides it. It's a movable wall, so each one can flow into their space if they needed to for overflow. And another benefit of the way that they work together is that Parents for Community Living, their typical office hours or program hours are Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, whereas the church, often meets on weekends or evenings. And so in terms of shared parking, shared the foyer, the kitchen, a lot of those sorts of things, the offsetting hours we're expecting will really work quite nicely for them. This is a bit of a shot of the church end of things. So because of the elevation, you can't really see it in this picture, but we were able to bring in higher ceilings in the church area. So when you're in that space, it does still feel like a worship space. And some of the older pieces of the church as well, inside the worship space, the older glass windows across for the church are also still in there.
1-bedroom units, and
I think we've got somebody who probably should be muting their microphone. Thank you. So in terms of this project, the 1-bedroom units there, that $497 a month, that's set to the Ontario Disability Support Payment Program shelter allowance. And so the funding arrangement we have with the region of Waterloo, and they're the service provider here. You'll have a similar municipal government in Huron County that's the service provider there. They wanted a certain number of units to be set at the ODSP shelter allowance. So even if somebody's on ODSP, they could afford to stay there. And then we move up to 994, which in Kitchener-Waterloo is actually still below the average market rent. But we really wanted to keep them under $1,000. And so we have a mix of units within the building. 12 of them are set to the ODSP shelter allowance, and the rest of them migrate up to the higher numbers. And we think that's important not only to help the budget work out properly, but also the different rents do give you a bit of a mix of people living within the building as well. And so then we have, I think, just a better culture within the building as opposed to if it was all people on ODSP. And our service worker would probably be overtaxed then. So we just really like that mingling of different types of people with different demographics and backgrounds. And in some ways, the different rents help us to achieve that. So the main floor highlights, like I said, we have a movable wall between the church area and Parents for Community Living. They share an entrance. Our tenants come in through a separate entrance. And there are community rooms in the building as well that are accessible from the outside. So those groups that I referred to earlier, like the Girl Guides and the Meals on Wheels, those sorts of organizations can actually still access space to use on an evening or through the week. And the idea is that we can still keep it as a bit of a community hub in the area. It's important that when you create a new building as well, you make it accessible and energy efficient. And so there's thresholds for that we wanted to hit. There's a lot of old stock of building out there, and the challenge is to try and keep the older buildings available without people moving out. A renovation, what they call renovictions happening, where somebody moves out or they're evicted out for renovations, and all of a sudden the rent doubles. We're seeing a fair bit of that in the Kitchener-Waterloo area. So we're trying to figure out how we can try to maintain that old stock of housing, but the new stock, like this building, is also important because it does have those barrier-free rooms, apartments, access into the building with 0 steps, all those sorts of things that are important for an aging population. From a budgetary perspective, the overall budget at the beginning of the project was 15 million. Actually, I think it might have been 14.7, but then we actually got real budget numbers from the contractor. We didn't come in too far above this. I think we landed at around $15.2 million. In the midst of COVID and all the escalation in prices that we saw over the last year and a half, we actually had a really good experience in terms of keeping costs in line. And here you see the breakdown of the different partners. So although we try to have equal voices on the board, which I think is important if you want to have a really collaborative partnership, you can see that Menno Homes is carrying the majority of the financing for this project. So we had a $5 million capital campaign. We closed that off at the end of August, and we really focused on major donors for this project, recognizing that a lot of people are struggling right now, but our experience has been that on larger capital campaigns, it's the major gifts that really move the project forward. We wanted to have everybody involved, but if I go back and look at the numbers, and we ended up at just over $5.2 million in donations, I would say the top 4 million of that came from folks who were making gifts $10,000 and above. For us, they range from within $10,000 to $250,000. So I had another video that I'm not even going to try and show.
I do have the one.
Oh, do you?
Yeah,
Okay,
I can
well,
try.
I was actually at the end of what I was going to share here because I really wanted to open it up for questions. So I'm going to stop my share.
Okay.
Let you take control, and we'll go from there.
We'll see how it goes.
Sure.
This is roughly where you wanted to start, I think.
Yeah, somewhere around here. Now I can't hear it.
Yeah, I can't
No?
hear it either.
No.
Oh,
Still no
okay.
audio, Pat.
Sorry?
Still no audio.
Okay. Does anybody know? Yeah, there's something you have to do, isn't there, to get the Hmm.
Yeah, I apologize for not testing that
The
earlier.
video, there's some, yeah. Dang, I can hear it beautifully, but that doesn't help, does it? Well, I'll send out the link anyway, and everybody can go and have a look at it. It's the best we can do, I guess.
Yeah, that's fine. So I apologize for that, but that's a very quick run through on who Menno Homes is as an organization, and kind of the most recent project that we've completed that was a partnership. You know, I don't know the landscape very well in Huron County in terms of who's providing housing or who's active in the space out there, but my encouragement would certainly be that to tackle it through some sort of collaborative partnership is really the best way to tackle these larger problems. We can't do it alone. We need to work together on these sorts of things.
So Dan, can you tell us a little bit about how you raised $5 million?
You ask. First rule of sales, ask.
True enough.
Well, we knew it was going to be, I mean, and that 5 million, that would be the sum total of all the money Menno Homes has raised up to date in our 20-year history. So it's not like we have experience raising $5 million.
Right.
Our last fundraising project was in Elmira. That was $2.5 million. And I think the total of all fundraising in the 15 years prior to that was $2.5 million. And so it was a big project for us. And how we went about doing that, well, the first thing I did is I knew that Menno Homes didn't have a strong enough brand recognition in Kitchener-Waterloo to do it with just our existing donor base. We really had to expand that. And I was trying to figure out, well, how do we get somebody who's going to be well connected, who'd be sympathetic to the work that we're doing, and could make those major donor asks, at least make those introductions for us. That was a couple of the video clips we didn't get a chance to see tonight, but I had the opportunity to run into Carl Zare, who had been the mayor of Kitchener, the longest serving mayor. I'm not sure how many years he was, probably 15 years or something like that. And I didn't actually know Carl very well, other than by name or reputation. But you know, we need to be bold about these sorts of things. I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, "Carl, have you?" I ran into him at the credit union. Well, he was there, and I made a point of running into him. And I said, "Carl, have you got a few minutes?" And you know, whenever somebody asks you that, you know they're always about to ask you something. But he graciously said yes, and he heard me out. He said, "I want to think about it for a little bit." And then he got in touch with me a few weeks later, and he says, "Yep, I think I'd like to be involved in this." And from Carl's perspective, he had been, and it comes up in the video clip, he had been mayor of Kitchener during much of the early stages of the economic redevelopment that is now inadvertently putting a lot of pressure on the housing system there. And he doesn't feel bad about that, but he says one of the unintended consequences was that, you know, we really have pushed up the price of real estate and impacted people who struggle to get by. And in some ways, helping out with this project was a bit of his way of trying to balance the scales on that. So Carl, you know, when you tap somebody on the shoulder like that, you don't know whether they're just going to let their name be used and we're still going to do all the work. And I didn't know enough about Carl to know one way or the other, but he rolled up his sleeves, he dug right in. I still regularly connect with him on stuff. I have a great deal of respect for him now. And between Carl and then some of the other people that we brought to our volunteer capital fundraising campaign, and you know, previous connections that I had through the work of Menno Homes, somehow it came together. There's always the surprises. There's the ones that you don't expect, and there's the ones that you had hoped for that don't come through because, you know, their situation has changed, the project doesn't resonate with them, or maybe they're just doing a lot of something elsewhere and it doesn't work within their funding, you know, their giving budget. You just never know, but you got to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember Dan interviewing Carl there and him telling me that story about his involvement with the redevelopment in Kitchener. And
Okay, yeah.
yeah, I thought that was really cool backstory for the whole project. Yeah.
Hmm. And I mean, there was somebody, and he's in the video as well. We brought on Bob Astley, who I didn't know at all prior to this. Bob had been the CEO of Sun Life when they changed over to Clarica, and very well connected. We had approached him for a donation, which he and his wife Judy ended up doing, but then he was so enthusiastic about the project, then he asked if he could actually be part of the capital fundraising campaign.
Wow.
And so then he made a couple of other calls that also, ended up with some nice 6-figure donations. And so it's, you just don't know how it's going to happen when you start networking and talking to people, but you have to keep telling the story and sharing the vision. And if it's a compelling story, people want to get involved. People want to look for an opportunity to make a difference. And there's a lot of conversation around housing, but it's such a big problem that not every, people, you kind of throw up your hands at a certain point and say, well, how do I help? Well, give them something to help, right? Give them something that they can latch on to and go, okay, this isn't going to solve the problem across Huron County, but for the people who will call this housing their home someday, it will change their lives. And that's that's the thing you really want to hold on to. And the thing about a well-built project is it's not just changing their lives now for this year. It's as long as they live there, and it continues to do that literally for decades to come for whoever's living there, as long as you can hold on to that sustainability model that I talked about at the beginning, where once the project's done, it does carry itself and all the associated costs.
Yeah, an interesting comment you made right at the beginning of social worker as part of the team, and because a lot of times, people that are looking for affordable housing need some other support. How is that funded, and how do you manage that?
We build that right into the initial budget, and so if we have a budget for capital, and then we know that we're going to have X number of dollars for rent coming in when the project's done. And out of the rent, that's the only source of income we have for ongoing operations. So the rent money has to pay the mortgage, and then it pays the maintenance and the property management. And then a sliver of that is what pays for that community support worker as well. It's built right into the original budget, so that we're not dependent on government funding for that social worker. Because as soon as you're dependent on government funding, well then, or grants, you're doing annual grant requests. I mean, those take a lot of work.
Yeah.
So our goal has always been to build it in right at the beginning.
So Dan, you said there was a lot of talk about housing, and obviously we keep hearing about funding envelopes. The federal government, it seems like everybody's saying that they have it. Do you have any, I'm sure you've got another project on the go. Do you have some secret sources of funding, government funding?
Well, I don't know if there's any secret ones. The thing with the government funding is that, it's not really that predictable, and it kind of comes, I don't know how it works in Huron County, but in Waterloo Region, there used to be a program called Investment in Affordable Housing. The federal and provincial governments would match funds and give it to the local government to determine who that funding was going to go to.
Okay.
They would do a request for proposal on an annual basis. We would put a submission in, other housing providers would put submissions in, and then somebody gets selected. It's kind of a competitive process. And once that money is gone, then you're kind of sitting there waiting, and it's hard because how do you they're always looking for projects that are ready to go, but if you don't have land, they're not even going to consider you, right? And so it's a bit of a chicken and egg sort of a thing, where we've been fortunate. So with the partnership with Bridgeport, the church already owned the land, so we could submit an application in confidence saying, well, we've got a partnership with somebody who already owns the land,
Right.
The last project we did in Elmira, it was the developer that we bought the land from was friendly to what we were doing. So he did vendor take back mortgage on it at 0% for a couple of years, so that we could kind of align things so that when the RFP process came around, we could say once again, yes, we own the land, we have drawings that are ready to go, and it just gives you a leg up in that process. So
Okay.
that's the investment in affordable housing money. The other
Okay.
one that's being talked about a lot right now through CMHC is their co-investment funding. And that's kind of the most common way of getting funding now as well. And that's a combination of loan and grant. They don't do much on the grant side of things. On the loan side of things, if you can get through their process, and it is a government bureaucracy that is painful, but it's worth getting through to the end of it if you can stick with it. So I'll give you a bit of the grant money portion isn't huge dollars. On the loan side of things, we locked in last year in May, I think at 1.75%. That's locked in for 10 years. They did a 50-year amortization on that. Now 50 years, I shook my head at that. I thought, how can I in good conscience, commit Menno Homes to a 50-year amortization? But at 1.75%, suddenly it wasn't such a hard thing to think about. And the reality is, normally we've done 25-year mortgages, pay it off, right? That's our mentality. We want to pay it off. But people are looking for housing now. And the housing we build now on a project that has a 50-year amortization, if it's done right, that housing will still be there in 50 years. And so at 1.75%, I think that's the right approach for us to take.
Right.
My advice to you would be, they want partnerships and collaboration. So that's a key piece of that funding model with CMHC. Do not depend on them for cash flow purposes. Simple as that. Like if you're able to secure CMHC co-investment funding and you're going down that path and it's worth the pain, but from a cash flow perspective, to pay your contractors on time and to keep the project moving, just absolutely make sure you've got other sources of cash to get you through that, because it's a government bureaucracy and they don't have the same sense of fiscal management around those sorts of things as what the rest of us do. That's a nice way of saying it, I think.
Well, it's as nice as you can say anyway. Yeah. Good attempt.
Now, we've been fortunate as well at Menno Homes recognizing that. So because we have 20 years of history and we do now have a bit of a portfolio of housing, we've got equity in some of that. And so how we tackled that cash flow issue is that when I knew CMHC was going to be late, we got our last advance. It was supposed to be construction financing. We got our first advance from them a month before occupancy.
Ooh.
Okay, so there's no way we could have done this if we'd been relying strictly on them. We had a good partner in Kindred Credit Union who advanced money on construction financing. We also took out equity loans on our other properties so that we could move the project forward without relying on them. Eventually, we're going to get all that money, and we're pretty well there now. But if we waited for it, we would have really missed a window. And speaking, I'll go back to something I said earlier around those nonprofits that were all developed about 40 years ago. So you'll remember I mentioned one in Waterloo. It was Waterloo Mennonite Homes. It was connected to a church there. They retired. They transferred ownership over to us, but they're landlocked. They don't have room to build there, but they had just paid off their mortgage. And because they're a charity and they are providing affordable housing and they had received government funding, I was actually able to help them get property tax exemption, which is a big deal. And so with MPAC property tax exemption now, so they're sitting cash flush. They've got really good cash flow, but they have nowhere to put it because they don't have a building. So we've actually entered into another partnership now with a similar nonprofit at St. Jacobs called Spruce Lawn. It had been started 38 years ago by the local churches in St. Jacobs. They're at the same stage paid off their mortgage, wanted to do a new project. They actually have land to do a new project on, but they were having trouble getting the numbers to work and navigating the CMHC system. And so we're also, hopefully by the end of November, they'll be transferring ownership of that over to us, and we can carry it forward. And we'll actually be able to use the surplus cash from Waterloo Mennonites Homes in Waterloo to help offset some of the capital investment that's required in St. Jacobs. And that's something that you can do if you start bringing all these different small independent groups together. You know, if we want to tackle it, we need some scale, but it needs to be kind of under an umbrella. I'm not really about empire building, but I do think it's important that you know, if you can do more together. And that for me is a perfect example of where one nonprofit is able to help something go forward at the location of another one, because now they're both part of what we're trying to do together at Menno Homes.
You're a genius, Dan, at just connecting things up, whether it's fundraising or collaborations or like I said that to Ryan Erb the other day, and he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "No, basically he'd clone you if he could." But
yeah, it's fun. I mean, you know, like I said at the beginning, I'm a farm boy from Bruce County, right? I spent the first kind of portion of my working career, most of it for an automation company in Waterloo. We built robotics and assembly lines. And so my midlife crisis was, instead of going out and buying a red sports car, I hopped the fence over to the nonprofit sector. So, I mean, for me, there's a faith component to that, you know, which is why I'm involved. But I certainly think I've been able to transfer some of the skills I learned in the private sector over to the nonprofit sector.
So when if you go to CMHC and you go into affordable housing projects, expand your knowledge, how worthwhile is it going into there? I'm leery of government programs.
Yeah, and you know, the thing about CMHC and that co-investment program, I mean, you are dealing with government bureaucrats on that.
That's right.
And they're not, some of them are really good. I mean, I've met some really good people there who are genuine and passionate about what they're doing. They're working within a larger system that is really cumbersome. So, you know, it's like having a good sailor on the Titanic. It doesn't necessarily always do you a lot of good, but there are some good people there that can help you navigate the system. And ultimately it's worth it, because for us, if you go back to that $5 million capital campaign that we had, we launched that without any expectation of CMHC financing. That was at market rate, and with the investment in affordable housing money, so we got a total of, say, 4.6 prior to, you know, to get into that 15 million of government funding. And then we said, okay, we're going to have to raise $5 million in order to make this project long-term sustainable. And then once we got the project rolling, that's when we approached CMHC. And because of their lower interest rates than what we had budgeted, the amortization, which then allows us to borrow more money, we actually will have money left over from that 5 million that we can put into phase 2. Remember, that property had room enough for 2 buildings. So we're going to be able to go ahead much sooner with phase 2 because of the CMHC financing. So it's government people, they're bureaucrats, they're painful to deal with, and ultimately it's worth it.
I guess for me, the first step is you need the land.
Yeah.
So, and then you start your affordable housing. You need somebody to give you a chunk of land.
Give it to you, hold it for you. You've got it. Yeah. If you don't have control of that land, they're not really going to look at it. Okay. No. That's a challenge. So we've been able to do it through creative partnerships, because we've never been able to go out and buy land. We've never had money to go out and buy land. The only way we've been able to do it was with the church transferring ownership. So we didn't have to pay the church any money, right? the way the deal works with the church is that the land was appraised at $1.8 million. Their portion, the construction cost is 1.2. And so once the project is done, we'll actually be paying them back $600,000 because of the value of the land. So they didn't donate the land, but we didn't have to pay them in order to transfer it over.
Hmm.
And the vendor take back in Elmira was important. Same with actually the Rockaway project that was before my time in Kitchener. That was another group that actually sold it to Menno Homes for $10 because they wanted it to be used for affordable housing. So it was a dirty site. It used to be the old bus garage in Kitchener. So there was remediations. I think they spent maybe $300,000 on remediation. But once again, they were able to acquire the land without a huge cash outlay.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do, right? Now, I always joke the fact that they paid $10, and I always thought those small deals like that was $2. So I say, I tell people we paid 5 times the typical rate for that piece of land at $10.
Dan, I'm wondering, thinking about how you keep your rents so low. And I did notice your units are kind of on the, what I consider a small size.
Yeah.
Is that part of it, or the nonprofit?
Yeah,
Part
well,
of
the nonprofit is part of it. I mean, the way you're able to keep the rents low, and we're contractually obliged to do that because of our agreement with the region. So when we got the funding from the region, which is a grant, we had to say we will have X number of units at the OBSP shelter allowance. And we will have a certain, and we can't go up, there's a complicated formula. You can't go above the average market rent and stuff like that. But the size is an interesting one. The apartments that we built in Elmira, I think they averaged 687 square feet. These ones are much smaller. We have some down as low as 525 square feet. And, I look at it and go, boy, that's small. And then I turn around and I look at what the private sector is building in Kitchener-Waterloo. And they're trying to make money. And they're building, some of them are sub 500 square feet. 500 to 600 square feet is the typical size now. People are going out and they're paying $500,000 for that as a condo.
Yeah.
So I have to kind of get my head over the fact that what I think is an appropriate sized apartment is old thinking. That's, I struggle a little bit with that because I look at it and go, wow, boy, that's tiny. But that's what the private sector is doing, and people are buying it, and that's becoming the standard. So I kind of have to quit imposing what I would want on people that we're trying to help.
Right.
But 525, because our construction costs on that, we probably ended up around $225 a square foot. So it's not cheap to build.
No.
But that's ICF construction. That's hollow core slab floors. It's not a stick frame building. It's going to be there in 100 years.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
Dan, I've got a question. Have you tried the model where someone contributes capital with to essentially buy a share in a unit with the promise of that capital being returned when they vacate the unit down the road?
Yeah, no, we haven't. I haven't looked at that. I mean, it's an interesting idea. It's almost like a bit of a life lease.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that happen with seniors housing. I know there's an example of that in St. Jacobs. I'm not quite there yet where I have to start thinking about that. I'm getting closer.
Well, it might appeal to sort of the mid-range group that perhaps is still wants that pride of ownership, but really is prepared to commit more of their capital than they would normally if they knew it was going to come back at the other end.
Yeah, I think that model works really well for people to help them transition from a single detached home somewhere into, like we used to say, a move into town, right? But that's, but still, you know, I've always owned my house. You know, I mean, I know when my dad, you know, he was living in Chester, he finally moved to Hanover to a retirement home. That was a big deal for him to, you know, to not own anything anymore, right? I think that life lease model works well for that. From what I've heard, I don't know much about it. If you're really interested in it and want some more details, I do know the person who was in charge of pulling all that together for the Meadows in St. Jacobs. I can certainly put you in touch with him. He'd be more than willing to share what he's learned.
Any other questions, folks? I think it looks like that's about it. Would you agree, Pat? Yeah. Well, thank you, Dan. Where are you? I just lost you. Well, there he is. Okay, you jumped on my screen.
Yeah, no problem.
Very interesting, and you persevered through having difficulty with technology, through heavy rain, through sitting in a van in the No Frills parking lot, and all your friends are having a good time, and you're here with us. We very much appreciate that.
I can see them anytime.
Yeah. So thanks so much. It was awesome. Well done.
Yeah, I just,
Enjoy.
no, good luck with whatever you're doing out there. I mean, I'm available if you have questions or whatnot. Our hope is to help people figure out how to do it. It's a countrywide, it's a province-wide issue, and we certainly, you know, want to share what we've learned if it can help others. So glad to be part of it. Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks again. Super.
Thank
Thanks.
Dan.
Thanks
Very much.
everyone for joining us. It's an issue in Grand Bend and across Huron County, so it's lovely to see so many people. And I think we're about done, right, Pat? We're signing off here. Thanks,
So,
everyone.
so when are you
Sorry.
gonna start the Affordable Housing Committee?
There you go, Charles. Where I lost you. Charles is up there. Well,
Stay tuned, Cheryl. That's all I'm gonna say.
come on, you have many days in your week where you're free. I know.
Yeah,
We-
right.
We'll get you on it. Thanks.
You're definitely on the committee, Charles, so I mean.
Yes, that's it.
it.
That's it for sure. Anyway, guys, thanks very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Take care.